Well, yesterday, thousands descended on London for a huge pro-Palestinian rally, including the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn.
The protest was largely peaceful, but with viral social media videos of some attendees appearing to express support for Hamas, opinion is now very much divided on how the police should deal with these sorts of protests.
Well, our political correspondent Katherine Forster is here. I mean, you were there yesterday. I mean, what was the mood like?
It was largely peaceful. I should say I was there from about 11 o'clock in the morning to about 3:30 in the afternoon. There were ultimately about 15 arrests, but a lot of those followed later in the day, into the evening in Trafalgar Square. There were some altercations with police, but by and large, it was a very mixed group of pretty peaceful protesters on the whole. Old people, young people, babies in buggies, dogs. But, of course, there are always some who are taking a more extreme view. Now, the police were very clear talking to them what was and was not acceptable. I think a lot of the arrests were to do with people had been told that they were not to obscure their face. I did see them talking to one woman that just you could see her eyes and insisting that was removed. They also had legal advisors on hand, basically to police the police, to make sure that the police were acting properly, and if people were arrested, to tell them their rights. So we have been very, very tolerant in this country of this sort of protest. Of course, there's been protests in Manchester, in Liverpool, Edinburgh, all across the country and all across the world. But other countries have been much less tolerant. France, Germany banned pro-Palestinian protests altogether, though in France people did gather anyway, and I think tear gas was used. But very difficult. The majority, people talking to me just saying, how do you think it feels to have no home? A Palestinian lady who now lives in the UK saying, we have no home, how does that feel? But then, of course, you see those images that have gone viral, the front page of the Daily Mail, girls wearing cutout images of paratroopers. And we know that Hamas, some of them came into Israel by parachute to commit those atrocities. So certainly a pro-Hamas element, but that would say much in the minority.
But actually, if you look at the video, I mean, the thousands of people who were there, only 13 arrests, did you say?
It's not many, is it?
That's not many, actually, no.
No.
I would have expected it to be worse, actually. I'm very, very pleased that it wasn't.
How is it possible to gauge, because this is, as you said, the fact that police are being policed, although it shows just how delicate this all is. I mean, were a lot of people there being pro-Palestinian but not anti-Israeli? Because it's an important distinction, isn't it?
This is the problem, isn't it? And it's an absolute minefield. Where does concern for innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza and their right to live in peace, where does that tip? And concerns about how Israel's response may or may not be proportionate, when does that tip into anti-Israeli sentiment? I was talking on a very different scale at Labour Party conference. These pro-Palestinian voices outside the secure zone, very much on the fringe. As a Labour staffer said to me, can you imagine if Jeremy Corbyn, who was at the rally yesterday, had still have been in charge, they'd have been in the hall waving their flags. I think it's a measure of how far Labour have come. But it's a very fine line, isn't it? And talking to a man there who'd begun by saying, this is absolutely horrendous what's happening, he then went immediately into, but basically Palestinians have had such a terrible deal, they've been treated appallingly, they're in an open-air prison, etc., etc. And in the end, I said to him, you basically sound like you're saying Israel have brought this on themselves. And he was like, yeah, exactly. So it's very difficult.
But, you know, it's interesting because there are a lot of news websites around at the moment, I mean, proper ones, where you start to think, how was this allowed to happen in the first place? I don't mean the attack, the recent attack. I mean the whole history of that part of the world. And you start to try and figure out how it was chaotically set up and then gave rise to terrible conflict. And you wonder how it will ever end, ever.
You do, and it's not just to, you know, Israel being created in 1948 officially and the British involvement, and it goes back hundreds, indeed thousands of years. This is a part of the world where there's always been shifting patterns, people in charge, different communities in conflict with each other. And it felt, up until just over a week ago, that things were a bit more settled, a bit more peaceful. There'd been a focus, I mean, under Donald Trump, the Abraham Accords, focusing on trade, relations with other neighbouring states. But it feels like Hamas last Saturday made a decision to blow all of that up. Yeah. And it feels like people in the Middle East, whether they're in Israel or Gaza, are now in a significantly worse position than they've been for a long time. And I think worth noting, of course, that the death count on the Israeli side, the highest since the Holocaust in the Second World War.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, you see, that gentleman you were talking to saying, ultimately, well, Israel had brought this upon themselves. But you've got, and there is an element where some people may look at that and think, yeah, well, maybe there's a point there, but that ignores then, doesn't it, the fact that, which I think is easy to forget if you're not Jewish, that Israel has been under, its very existence has been under threat. You know, surrounded by countries who say you should not exist, and not only that the state shouldn't exist, that Jewish people shouldn't exist, we almost forget about that existential threat that they've faced as well for decades and decades and decades.
Yes, and some people chanting at the march, free, free Palestine, from the river to the sea, Palestine. Now, that's effectively getting rid of
Israel.
Yeah, and I mean, Israel does not have very many friends in the region, Iran being top of the list of people that wish it.
Surrounded by
very, very ill. And also worth saying that the people of Gaza don't have many friends either, because I think Hamas are certainly not their friends. They don't really care how many they use to shield them. And also Egypt seems to have no intention. That's their only way out, because on one side they've got the sea, on two sides they've got Israel. You know, they are trapped, and Egypt seems to have no intention of letting them out. You've said that a few
but there could well be Hamas amongst them if they let them out.
Well, this is it.
As we've heard from Charlie earlier.
OK, Katherine, for now, thank you very much indeed. I mean, you must be exhausted at home, trying to work it all out. I mean, I imagine you've all got thoughts as to the rights and wrongs and the ways forward and all the rest of it. What I always come back to on this, I think, is that if there was who doesn't want peace ultimately? And if there was an easy answer, it would have been found a very long time ago.
I think there are some people in the world who don't want peace.
Well, yes.